I'm on a mission to empower thousands of young people across the world to become empowered change makers, to be part of a global movement that invites young people to become active citizens and change the world one very small step at a time. The world needs true leadership now, more than ever. In the decades to come, it will be this generation that will have to face head-on the issues of peace, war, equality, quality education. And yet when I look around, I still see inaction. I still see a lack of leadership. I see one big, great leadership vacuum, a vacuum that this generation can and should fill with courageous, ambitious leadership, the kind of leadership that puts the world first. Because together, this generation can and should build a better and more equitable world for all. But how do we get to a place where young people feel empowered to be change makers? In our schools, in our communities, in our countries. Now, reaching that goal, that mission, is not going to happen overnight. I'm not naive. But there is something we can do about it. And you're probably wondering, why am I so passionate about this particular agenda? And to answer that question, I first need to properly introduce myself. I'm Hayden. I'm 21. Now, I know that's difficult to believe, given I barely look old enough to buy a packet of paracetamol. The joys of a baby face, right? But I grew up in the seaside town of Portsmouth, to a pretty standard working-class family. I went to a local comprehensive just down the road from where I lived. I was a pretty happy child. I was really fascinated about animals, and I was really passionate about drama. So my early years seemed kind of normal. But as I grew up, things started to change. I started to get frustrated with people telling me, "You're too young to do things. You're too young to change things. And that your views don't matter." I'm pretty sure my mum just thought I was being a bit of a stroppy teenager, but I just wanted to be more and do more. So I tried to channel all of that energy into my city's youth forum. That whole experience changed my perception on what was possible. It gave me hope. It gave me positivity. And most importantly, it actually gave me a real outlet for my views. So a few months in to being elected the chair of this incredible youth forum, something heartbreaking happened. All of the staff, all of the funding that supported this most incredible group of young people disappeared overnight. I found myself in a position where I felt all alone. I was back to square one, and I had no idea what I was going to do. But I didn't sit still. At 16, I started my company, Unloc, which kept that youth forum alive. At 17, I went up to London to work for a fast-growth technology company to learn what it takes to run your own startup. At 18, I had the pleasure of being selected to represent the United Kingdom at the One Young World Summits in Dublin, Bogota, Bangkok, and also Ottawa, Canada. And more recently, the US Embassy honored me and 19 other young leaders with the Joe Cox Scholarship. Young people that stood up for courageous leadership. And that company that I started at 16 to keep that youth forum alive, we're now a growing network of over 100 schools and colleges. And I'm really, really proud of the achievements that we've made. Now, before we can talk about how we actually empower our next generation, we first need to talk about the real barriers that we face. It's not difficult to see why young people can feel disconnected with their communities. we live in an era of political disenfranchisement. We automatically assume when a politician opens their mouth, they're lying. We're concerned that the police are using unjustifiable force, where the systems and the processes that are established don't care, let alone listen to the views of young people. And where in our communities, the old and the young are considered to be separated by this so-called intergenerational divide. And it's in part the fault of the education system that we've built. It's this sense that young people should be passive listeners rather than active participants. And equally, it's the policy landscape too, that doesn't properly respond to the passions and interests of young people. But in contrast, what we really need right now is creative problem solvers. We don't need passive listeners. We need the kind of young people that can see a problem and fix it, that can identify something in their communities that's frustrating them, and they can act on it. Now, I don't think it's all doom and gloom. It's certainly not. But I do recognize that there is a problem. There is a problem with young people feeling overlooked. There is a problem with young people feeling disempowered. And there is a problem with young people feeling ignored. But what can we actually do to help young people to embrace that entrepreneurial mindset that I mentioned just then? We live in a very fast, complex world, so no solution is going to be easy. To identify what we can do, I've looked to some of the most amazing young people around me that are embracing that courageous leadership that I mentioned. I looked to Francois Reyes, a French national campaigner who's working on social mobility. I looked to Kieran O'Toole. Kieran is the most incredible 18-year-old working across the UK to tackle anti-bullying and reshape that whole agenda. I looked to my dear friend Jean de Motoni. He was a victim of the Rwandan genocide. And from his own personal tragedy, he set up a charity to help other people like him. That is true, courageous leadership. These incredible young leaders had to overcome policy that didn't listen, cultures that didn't encourage, and a whole range of other really, really difficult barriers in society. But what they did have was a real sense of determination, and they had raw leadership talent. So quite simply, my solution is based around three things. I call it the empowerment triangle. And it starts to look at and tackle some of these barriers that we face. At the bottom of that triangle, you start with permission. Permission is setting the tone. It's the culture we build in institutions. It's the way schools and colleges feel when you walk through the door. It's that permission to question, to challenge the decisions that are being made for you without any fear of any repercussion at all. It needs to feel an open space. And young people also need to know that they have permission to fail too. Not every idea is a great idea, and not every one of us is going to change the world overnight. And we also need to help people to change policy. Now, this is all about creating a policy landscape that actually responds to the views of young people, which I've already talked about. But it's more than that. It's businesses, it's government, it's officials working all together to make sure young people are listened to in everyday decision-making. Finally, to the right, we need to support those young people to develop the skills they need to be articulate and confident in expressing the views that they have. Those core leadership skills that we need not only to build that better world, but also to meet the needs of the job market. That's exactly what Unloc is trying to achieve with our network of 100 schools and colleges, but there's so much more that needs to be done. So if you combine those three things, you start to end up with true empowerment. Now, I'm not naive. I realize this is not a silver bullet. I realize that this is a really simple model, and there are so many factors that will hamper its practical implementation. But if we all could, in this room, work on just one of those three factors, I bet it will make a hell of a load of difference. I mentioned at the beginning of this short talk that I'm on a mission to empower young people to become change makers, to build a better world where young people are active participants. I invite you to join me on that mission. Thank you very much.